A depressing story. When I hear words like that surrounding a manga, I tend to think of something like Berserk, where the main character Guts has to face demons and monsters pretty much all the time. And if that isn't enough, he has had to go through some of the most traumatizing things any person could experience since the moment he was born. But a manga that broke me more than any other was surprisingly something that was a bit more based in reality. It's a manga called Goodnight Punpun. If I were to explain Punpun in a sentence, I would say it's a train that only gets worse as it goes on. The main character in this is someone who's very self-deprecating. He tends to let every little thing drag him down and never seems to bother trying to find a way out of all the negative things that come his way. As Punpun grows up, we see problems that really anyone out there could be facing. The main one, though, is centered around the relationships Punpun has between him and all the people around him. It's through those that we see the misery of this story really come through. Punpun's relationship with his mom is one that sticks out a lot to me. She inflicts a lot of pain onto Punpun when he is a child, and this follows him through his teens. It's one of the pieces that shapes him into the negative person he becomes. Now, although Punpun does go through some really painful and stupid things, it's like he doesn't grow. He doesn't really try to overcome anything. He convinces himself that he can't find any happiness whatsoever, and that all the bad things in his life is who he is. I've seen shows where the characters are able to overcome their misery and past traumas, and not let these types of things hold them back from continuing on their journey. But that is probably the main tragedy of Goodnight Punpun, and I can't really say that I've had a manga leave me with this feeling that there's really nothing to look forward to in the future. It's painful, and it's just a very suffocating story. It gives off the feeling that there's no light at the end of the tunnel. If Punpun makes me want to give up, Rainbow makes me want to fight with everything I have for the future. There's these 5 boys who get sent to what's pretty much a prison, or a juvenile detention center. There they meet some of the most vile and disgusting people ever, the very lowest of the lows of humanity. We see this very perverted doctor who likes to mess with the boys, and it's just very disgusting. Alongside him, there's also a very twisted prison guard, and an inmate who has a very large effect on the boys going forward. There's quite a lot of violence, and things do get pretty brutal throughout the manga, but the characters come to value some very important things. You get to see just how strong the bonds between these characters grow, and you also get to see a very strong sense of brotherhood. The author is not only able to show all that, but also how important freedom is to these characters. I don't know if I would call Rainbow unique, but I'd say it hits all the right notes in what makes a manga a good manga, and it's one of my favorites. This is one I left for a while and picked back up pretty recently, Jagaaaaaan. It's a pretty cool one where frogs drop from the sky and grant people's deepest desires, which results in these people becoming things called the fractured humans. The main character, Jagaaaaaan, is a cop who immediately starts to go around shooting these things and is able to beat them because he himself is also a fractured human. To me, I liked seeing all these different characters with these different desires and abilities. You know, you got some guy who could pretty much become the Terminator, this robot-looking guy. You got a group of people who come together to form the superhero group. One of the main characters we focus on is a part of the special team that is specifically made for exterminating the fractured humans. And he could transform into this badass Oni-looking thing. There's plenty of moments where I thought, wow, this manga is just awesome. But by the end of it, I'd say somewhere after the Deaderland arc, the story drops for me. And I kind of just left feeling disappointed. Junji Ito. The King of Horror is how I've heard him described, although I really haven't seen much of his works. So I just read 2 of his short story collections. One's called Soichi, which is centered around this kinda creepy kid who's called Soichi, and the other one's called Deserter. One thing I've learned with Junji Ito is to expect the unexpected. He's able to come up with some of the most creative horror I've seen, and that's what I've really come to like about him. Soichi has to be one of the most silly characters I've come across ever. My favorite story with him is this one where he dresses up and disguises himself as a giant cockroach to scare one of his classmates, only to find himself stuck in a tree. And then there's some old guy who apparently owns this part of the land, and he finds Soichi on his property and tries to kill him with an axe. And then one of the most random things ever, Soichi tries to pretend to be a cat by meowing, and It's a really weird thing to come out of a horror story. I just remember laughing so hard the first time I saw that. Junji Ito being able to do that while still keeping things creepy is what makes him, in my opinion, a great mangaka, especially when it comes to horror. Now for me, Deserter's short stories showed me that Junji Ito can kind of be hit or miss. A lot of the horror in Deserter depends on plot twists, and I found it kind of fun reading those type of horror stories. Mainly from what I've said about him at the beginning is, I just like seeing the unexpected happen out of nowhere. Now I remember this one story where this girl will find a specific person and pretty much stick to this person for a few days. Pretty quickly we find out the reason to this, and it's because this girl can take on the appearance of anyone she wants to. And as long as she stalks them, she's able to, steal their face. Eventually at the school that this girl goes to, everybody gets fed up with her. And so what they do is all one day they come wearing masks. Because of this girl's face starts to transform into something pretty terrifying. Soichi and the short stories of Deserter aren't the scariest horror stories I've read, but they have been the most fun pieces of horror I've pretty much seen so far. Delinquent manga from the outside looking in seem pretty boring because all it really is a whole bunch of fighting without any cool power systems or flashy superpowers. Instead, you usually follow some guy in school who goes around going head to head with the strongest guys in their school, then in their city, and that might lead to people from out of town. But I've heard a lot of talk about one manga called Crows and how it's straight up peak. I didn't feel that way first getting into Crows, and I had a hard time getting invested into the first few characters, which only became more problematic because the cast grows exponentially, with new characters being introduced up to the very final chapters. Boya Harumichi. This is one of the things that I definitely grew to like over the course of the story. He's a very simple-minded and carefree guy. What I like the most about him is the effect he has not only on his friends, but also his enemies, or his opponents. He's able to provide something to the people around him that goes beyond winning or losing or being the strongest. And although he doesn't say it himself, he's definitely a leader. He's able to bring a whole school of delinquents together, which speaks a lot about his character. Crows really sits at a weird place for me. First of all, I don't really like older manga all too much, and also because it has a few characters that I'm not really interested in at all. But yet there are some points that are fun to read. It's not the best thing I've ever read, and if I wasn't a fan of meathead fighting manga, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed it as much as I did. But at the very least, I did have some fun with it. Now, it's been a few days, but after I recorded most of this video, I went out and read 2 mangas surrounding Crows. One is a sequel to it called Worst, and the other is, I guess, a prequel called Crows 02. After reading both of these, I've definitely come to appreciate Crows a bit more and, diving into the world that is Crows. I think there's, some kind of cool history that goes on, and I guess politics is kind of like this big thing. I definitely liked Worst way more than I did Crows. I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion or not. Crows, I definitely was more on the edge of, just not enjoying it all too much. But Worst, I can say with a lot more confidence that I did enjoy that. I love that bald boy Hana a whole lot. I've been itching for a bit more from Satoru Noda, who is the author of Golden Kamuy. Now, Golden Kamuy was a very great experience when I was following along with it, and when I was able to catch up and finish it. It takes place after the Russo-Japanese War, where a man who was in the army, Sugimoto, and an Ainu woman named Asurpa look for gold. They have to compete with other people from the army, prisoners, and even some more of the Ainu people. It's a very good historical manga that shows the aftermath of war, while also giving us a look into not just the Japanese culture at the time, but also some of the Ainu culture. Eventually that ended though, and in the summer of 2023, finally the first chapter of Noda's new manga came out. And it's called Dogsred, a pretty unique title. Dogsred takes place in a more modern era, following a guy called Ro Shirakawa, who is one of the best figure skaters in all of Japan for his age. That is until he flips out and ends up in a town called Tamakomai, which is a town in northern Japan that is all about ice hockey. There he meets a group of kids and joins an ice hockey team. He's kind of reluctant to at first, and in his first game, he loses, and his team disbands. The reason Shirakawa freaks out in the beginning of the story is because he's done with figure skating. And so he showed that he was the best in Japan, but he stopped having fun with it very early on. Ice hockey, though, is intense, and he actually gets excited about it, to the point of being addicted. And so Shirakawa, with a few of his teammates, decides to join the school that actually beat them. So far, it's been a pretty funny story, actually, and Shirakawa is an oddball, to say the least. It's just under 20 chapters, so I'm very much looking forward to seeing more from this manga. So those were some of the manga that I've read recently. My favorite one was actually Rainbow. It's a very touching manga that really just hits hard. I didn't really enjoy every single one of these that I went over, but you know, some were a bit fun at the very least. I'm not too sure about when I'm getting this video out. It'll probably be around early February, hopefully a bit earlier. But from here on, I'm hoping of uploading at least a little bit more frequently than I usually do. I know last year I only uploaded like once a month. My goal for this year is definitely to just upload videos more frequently. But yeah, I'd like to know if you've read any of these mangas yourselves. I think they're, most of them are pretty popular, I'd actually say. I feel like really the only ones I haven't heard talked about before are the Junji Ito short stories, and also Noda's new manga, Dogsred. But yeah, that's gonna be it for me, so thanks for watching, see you in the next one, and peace.